Tai laba diena visiems, 15:30.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's 3:30 and we begin with our session. I'm very happy to see you here, very active. We're going to speak about hate crime today from the perspective of victims. This is the following structure. We'll see a video, presentations, and a debate in which you will be able to participate. The presentations will take place in English. If you wish to hear interpretation, please join the debate and choose by Zoom the interpretation channel. You need to be in Zoom in order to hear the interpretation. It's not enough to be on the website of the forum. It's also not sufficient for you to be on the forum if you want to win a prize. At the end of the debate, you will hear a question and you will hear the answer soon if you listen to everything we're saying in the session. You will receive either a jumper or a thermal cup. You can also pose questions to participants of the debate via Zoom. You need to join the debate by clicking on it and to write a question. And if you don't want to participate in the prize in the quiz nor ask questions, you can just view us on the website NZTF, that is the main cipher.lt. Let me remind you that the debate will be available online after it happens, and let me present to you the video, which is very meaningful for our debate related to hate crime. Many most vulnerable groups face hate crime. It's quite difficult for them to talk about their experience. You will see the videos and you will hear about traumatizing events of some people. Three courageous people, Mr. Kęstutis Rudzinskas, Mr. Fabian, Sanchez, and Rasma Pažemeckaitė openly spoke about their experiences, and thus they contribute to our understanding on hate crime and the harm they do. These videos were prepared by the Human Rights Centre that cooperates with documentary film creators Živilė Kropaitė and Maximilian Dejulier. After the 3 videos, we will come back for the debate, so please stay with us.
Bet va, 4 stygas, bet nieko, kalinka gerai yra. Tai va.
Aš esu Rasma, gyvenu
Panevėžyje. My name is Rasma, I live in Panevėžys. I love music and dancing. And I adore beauty and beauty procedures. At school, I was beaten up very harshly. When I was 14, I was asked, "Are you Chiga?" Then, or Roma. I remember I was hit on my head and I didn't remember anything anymore. I had to learn many things anew. I have to lie to the father of my children that I am from Moldova because he had written that Roma people need to be killed. I did this in order to avoid the experience of having to learn to read and write anew again.
I
simply want peace and quiet. I want cooperation. I am afraid for my twins, the children I gave birth to, and I'm afraid for the children of other Roma people, so they aren't treated the way I was treated at school.
I came to Lithuania 7 years ago. I came because I fell in love with one Lithuanian girl. We broke up, but I decided to stay here because I really like it. 5 years ago, I started a blog. So I was posting videos about Lithuania, my life here. Labas, Hebra. Hello, everyone. This week, it's 6 years that I moved to Lithuania. In March 11, there's a parade. In this parade, they are promoting these Lietuva lietuviams. So I went with a sign that was in Lietuva visiems.
Visiems! Visiems! Visiems!
To understand that this is not what is like what represents Lithuania, you know?
Lithuania is for everybody.
One day I was going to the gym. I went out from the bus in the bus stop and I saw these two guys that I think they were waiting there because I was always going to that way. Suddenly they just came to me and start beating me, and then they run away to that direction. When they were punching me, they were saying Lietuva lietuviams. I was shocked, and then I called to the police. They didn't guide me through what should I do in this process, you know, they just told me that they cannot do anything. And then I was thinking, I want to post this in social media, maybe someone knows who did this. This post got viral, actually. Someone contacted me and told me I know who they are. That's how later on the police found them. I found myself here. I found out who I am, who I want to be. Right now, I see myself living here and perhaps having a family in the future, you know.
I love you guys, and thanks for being my new home now. Visa God.
Čia LGBT vėliavas, gėjų eitynėse dalyvauju. Čia dovanų gavau iš klebono.
From a parish priest I was hit. I was born in Kaunas. My mother left me when I was 1. Later I was taken into the home for independent living. I've been living here already for 7 years. Life here is good. I like it. I had been beaten up. I was all blue. My eye was swollen and I was robbed. I went to a public bathroom next to a church. I wanted to make a friendship with someone, but he wanted to use my phone. I gave him my telephone. For the second time I met him, I bought him food. And then he invited me for a walk in the wood, and after we were done eating, he took off my glasses and kicked me in the eye. It was here. He robbed me and took everything from me, my phone, my glasses, and everything. There was a trial. He was there. He pleaded guilty and said, I beat him up because I'm not gay. Since then, I'm afraid this can happen again. I'm thinking about talking to strangers and making them new friendships. But I'm unlucky to make friendships.
This was it. I hope this has given some food for thought to all of us. We'll be able to discuss and reflect on them later in the discussion part. But now I want to give the floor to two wonderful speakers. You are given approximately 15 minutes each. That's just for everyone to understand the structure of the session. And first of all, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Paul Iganski, who is Emeritus Professor at Lancaster University Law School, the UK. And he's going to talk about hate crimes that hurt more. The floor is yours, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. I assume you can all hear me okay. Let me know if you can't. First of all, I'd like to say to Rasma and Emantas that I'm truly sorry to hear about your experience. And this testimonial experience, these testimonial accounts are very powerful indeed and much needed. Although I'm sure they can be painful for you to, to recall and relive these things. So thank you for offering them. In my presentation in 15 minutes, I'm going to talk to some of the scientific evidence and say just very quickly, thank you to the organisers. And it's been a great session so far, highly interesting, highly valuable. Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to contribute my thinking. I'll see if you thank me at the end of it, if you like my contribution. And one last thing before I get going is apologies for my dressings here. I haven't been beaten up. I had an accident on Tuesday, followed by some minor surgery. All I can say is my bicycle is in a worse condition than I am. So, it looks worse than it actually is. Okay. So on to my presentation. And I look forward to any questions that you might have. I'm just going to pull up the presentation now. I was asked to speak about my work on the impacts of hate crime. This morning, in this morning's session, one of the presenters mentioned that 10 years ago, not a lot of people across Europe had heard about the notion of hate crime, the idea of hate crime. Of course, hate crimes have been going on as long as we can remember across the generations, but the legal recognition of them and the criminal justice recognition of them across Europe is a relatively new phenomenon within the last decade and a half, let's say. And across this time, I've been researching the impacts and consequences of hate crime. And what started me off on that, I think it's relevant to say, is I thought, and I still think, well, what is it about hate crimes that somehow make them feel more reprehensible to us? What is it about hate crimes that bring people like us together? And what is it that over the last decade and more has triggered a criminal justice response? Is it simply that we find them abhorrent and detestable, the expression of these values, particular values and acts of hate crime, or is it something else? And I began to discover early on, talking with people who've been on the receiving end of hate crime, like our three contributors in the videos, people like them, talking to counsellors working with hate crime victims, that yes, there is something else going on. And this is why criminal justice systems and people like ourselves should be particularly concerned with them. And the issue essentially is more than abhorrence about them. It's about the hurts and the impacts. The bottom line is that when we compare hate crimes to otherwise identical, but otherwise motivated crimes, hate crimes on average hurt more. I don't necessarily mean in terms of physical injuries, but I think in terms of other injuries. And this is what I'm going to discuss in my presentation. Now, I'm just hoping that my screen will move on, forgive me. For this, I just have a lock. Let me turn to that one and see if, no, I beg your pardon. Okay. Can you see the next screen there? Fabian, would you nod? I can see you if you can see my second screen. Thank you very much. Okay, so a decade ago, I had senior police officers saying to me at conferences, but the jury is out about whether hate crimes hurt more. And therefore, along with colleagues internationally working in the field, a number of us began to put together social scientific evidence, quantitative evidence that would convince the skeptics. Convince those skeptics who say, well, personal testimony is very powerful and important, but it doesn't provide a persuasive case for why hate crimes should be treated differently. Let's put that objection aside. But what we started to do was to try and gather social scientific evidence that would convince the hardest skeptics. And a decade on, I think many of those skeptics are convinced. So, hate crimes hurt more, and the additional hurts for victims of hate crime, as I say in my slide here, have been established to scientific standards. I've got 3 headlines here, and I'm going to go into some of these in a little more detail. But please don't worry, I'm going to try not to bore the socks off you with statistics. First of all, how do they hurt? Well, we can think of what we might call social emotional distress experienced by people on the receiving end of hate crimes. The research evidence clearly shows that hate crime victims, compared to victims of otherwise identical crime, are more likely to report in crime surveys problems at work, problems at school, more arguments with family members or friends, being less trusting and less close with people. We might call these symptoms of social emotional distress. Secondly, very powerfully, there are symptoms of psychological distress. In crime surveys, when we compare hate crime victims as a group with victims of otherwise motivated crimes, hate crime victims are more likely to report post-victimization psychological distress. In other words, key symptoms are anxiety, anger, sadness, depression, etc. All of those that I've listed there on the slide. And even more, we can think of the physical manifestations of that psychological distress in psychosomatic symptoms. In crime surveys, hate crime victims are more likely to report these psychosomatic symptoms: headaches, trouble sleeping, changes in eating, drinking habits, fatigue, muscle tension, back pain, etc., and more symptoms that I've listed there. I'm going to dip down into some of the evidence, but let me give you a health warning about this chart. You're not meant to, you could do this afterwards if you like, just look closely at all the data. It's the overall picture that I'd like you to see. I'm referring here to a very recent survey that was commissioned by the OSCE mission to Skopje to carry out, a hate crime victimization survey, the first ever in the Republic of North Macedonia. In total, 2,500 people were interviewed in a sample representative of the population across the whole country. And people were asked, as they are in crime victimization surveys, have you been a victim of crime? And if they say yes, have you been a victim of crime in the last 12 months? If you say yes, then they're asked a whole range of other questions. Now, the purpose of that survey was to compare the responses from people who said they've been victim of hate crimes with victims of other crimes. In this chart, to see the big picture, the black bars are percentages for hate crime victims, the grey bars are percentages for victims of otherwise motivated crimes. What this picture simply shows, if you step back and look at it, is that hate crime victims, for every single symptom of psychological distress, were more likely, in other words, higher percentages of hate crime victims reported these symptoms when they were asked in the survey. Had you experienced these types of things? Some of these symptoms I mentioned on my previous slide. The thing to note is that not all victims of hate crimes and otherwise motivated crimes experience these symptoms. In most cases, it's a minority. In some cases, it's a close minority. In one case here, it's a small majority. But in all the other cases, a minority of victims experience these symptoms. But in every single case, the pattern is clear. When we think about the psychological damage, hate crimes hurt more. I mentioned psychosomatic symptoms. In this same survey, we asked people, if you've been a victim of crime in the last 12 months, had you experienced any of these symptoms? Again, the black bars are for hate crime victims, the grey bars are for victims of otherwise motivated crimes. We see smaller proportions here of all victims report these symptoms, but nevertheless, in the case of every single psychosomatic symptom, except for high blood pressure here, hate crime victims, the black bars, were more likely to report these symptoms than victims of otherwise motivated crime, the grey bars. I don't know what explains this difference here about high blood pressure. It was a quantitative survey, so we couldn't delve, the interviewers couldn't delve further with the respondents, so I have no explanation for that. But it's the overall pattern that, again, hate crime victims are more likely to experience and report these psychosomatic symptoms. Again, minorities of victims experience these, but clearly hate crimes hurt more when compared to otherwise motivated crimes. You are definitely not meant to try and read closely this slide. It's just there for graphical purposes for me. What we did in the survey was actually, with all the questions we asked, we'd used clinical measures of post-traumatic stress of the respondents who gave us their permission to be asked these questions. And here I compare hate crime victims against other crime victims. I've got a whole list of symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Some of them have been included in my slides already, many others not. Don't read them all now, you can read them after. My bottom line is, when we think of post-traumatic stress syndrome, post-traumatic stress syndrome, collectively, hate crime victims as a group are more likely to report and experience and report in surveys post-traumatic stress type symptoms. Again, not all victims, but clearly hate crimes hurt more. I could have chosen other surveys to make that point, but that was the most recent one that I was involved in. So very briefly, what's clear is that hate crime can strike deeply inside a person, more deeply than many other crimes. In case there are any skeptics out there, to save you, and I don't have the time to go into all the data, read the reports yourself if you want to, but we compare crime against crime, because some people say, well, the type of crime makes a difference, doesn't it? Well, obviously they thought about that as analysts, so we compare crime against crime, the same type of crime against the same type of crime. And surprisingly, these differences hold between hate crime victims and otherwise motivated. Well, so not surprisingly, when we try to understand why, the question is, why? Why do hate crimes hurt more? This is a very important question for people working with hate crime victims and for those people who are on the receiving end to think through themselves and work through it themselves, because they are the most important people in this process. They can strike more deeply inside than other crimes. Why? Because hate crime victims perceive the attack as being an attack on their identity, which it is. And it's very hard to articulate, but when I've spoken to people about this who've been on the receiving end, some people have said to me, it's like the core of my being that's attacked. It's my identity. It's different if you're beaten up, because your mobile phone is stolen or they want your wallet or whatever. But if you're attacked because of who you are and how you look to how your identity is perceived by the attacker, that is far more deeply wounding because it gets at the core of who you are. Furthermore, people on the receiving end, injured parties, I don't like using the word victims, but it's commonly used, using alternatives here, injured parties, tell me that the message, there's a message, hate crimes send a message, whether the perpetrator intends it or not. Often the perpetrators do, sometimes they don't, but the message felt by the person on the receiving end is that they are unwelcome, devalued, denigrated, and despised. And that hurts. And that marks out hate crimes from other crimes. So, trying to make the point that hate crimes are different in this way when compared with other crimes. In fact, the message sent to the victim is an exclusionary message, if you think about it. This is how hate crimes are different. It's an act of marginalization, an act of social exclusion. Exclusion from the civil community to which the victim might have thought they belonged. And if you think about the exclusionary impact, social psychological research I'm not going into on the impact of ostracism, marginalization, shows that it's very mentally damaging. And this is the case here with hate crimes. And practically, it can also help. I remember one young man who I spoke with in Belfast, a refugee, who told me that he was beaten up and outside his home, and the perpetrators said to him, "Come back here and we'll kill you, etc., at the racist abuse attack. He went to hospital for his injuries, and he never returned home. So the exclusion there, the marginalization, was starkly explicit. And it was effective in this case. But in many cases, it's not as explicit like that, but it's sometimes intended and more often than not perceived. Very quickly now, so I don't run too much over time. I've talked about the injured parties, well, the person directly on the receiving end, but they are not the only injured parties, of course. We can think of the person on the receiving end of the attack, whether it's a verbal attack or physical attack or an act of graffiti, as being only the primary victim. We have others, people who share the victim's identity, that person's identity, who know them, who come to hear about the crime, who come to read about the crime. They could live thousands of miles away. They think, that could be me next. If it happened to them, it could happen to me. So it has a kind of terroristic impact, if you like. Other targeted communities. So if a gay man is targeted in an attack, a refugee, a Syrian refugee who lives in the neighborhood, who reads about that attack in the local press can think, well, we know what goes on. If it can happen to them, it can happen to me, and so forth. So it's very hard to kind of scientifically demonstrate this impact. Methodologically, it's very hard to do. But on the basis of anecdotal accounts from communities, we can think of waves of harm, if you like, from the initial attack. And lastly, so I don't go too much over time, what's the whole point of understanding this? Well, firstly, I think it provides an impetus to the criminal justice system and criminal justice professionals to take hate crimes seriously and understand that they are both the same, but also different to other crimes. And the way they are different is that potentially they can have greater impacts upon victims and communities in numerous ways. And that calls for a lot of understanding and a lot of sensitive treatment. And furthermore, for those people supporting injured parties, whether it's the direct victims or communities, recognizing the impact arguably provides the basis for a respectful and sensitive service. It's at the core. Understanding the impact is at the core of understanding hate crimes victims' needs and at the core of understanding respectful and sensitive treatment. Much of that is contained in this document here and published recently by the OSCE, oh dear. So thank you very much for your attention. Apologies for going a couple of minutes over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. We hope that your bicycle hasn't experienced any hatred. And I just want to ask you a very brief question about the harm that spreads beyond the direct victim. You have said that it's difficult to prove that scientifically. I just want to ask you, how is it possible to measure it at all then?
Well, the research to date has been small scale, random samples, purposive samples of respondents. And that's powerful in itself. But, you know, skeptics say, as they did about the evidence on individual victims a decade ago, well, that's not to scientific standards. Okay. It's very, very hard indeed, because you would have to do a large community survey where hate crimes occur and try and capture people who have been affected who weren't the direct victims. Huge and costly exercises that, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been done yet. But there is a mass of anecdotal testimonial evidence there, which strongly supports you know, this community-wide impact.
Thank you so much. We will move to the next presentation, the second one, Victims' Rights and Secondary Victimization. And that's going to be delivered by Petra Vytejčková, who is a lawyer and head of the legal program at In IUSTITIA. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Czech Counseling Center for Hate Crime Victims. Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to deliver you a brief presentation on the rights of victims and secondary victimization. I was wondering about my presentation, and I decided that instead of speaking about victim rights in general, I will speak specifically about Czech national legislation, because I think it can give us a very good understanding about victim needs and hate crime victim rights. Very briefly about me. My name is Petra Vytejčková. I am an attorney. I specialize in criminal law, human rights, and especially victim rights. And in my legal practice, I focus mainly on representing hate crime victims and domestic violence victims in the court of law. I work very closely with In IUSTITIA. In IUSTITIA, since 2009, In IUSTITIA have been the only NGO in the Czech Republic that focuses entirely on hate crime, providing social help, legal representation for hate crime victims within the scope of the whole country, free of charge. We also we are monitoring related statistic data in order to provide a comprehensive analysis of the problems related to hate crime investigation in the Czech Republic. We also educate professionals such as police, state prosecutors, judges, social workers, etc. I will skip some of my slides as we don't have enough time. When we talk about victim rights, we have to talk about the Victim Directive that entered into force in 2012, establishing minimum standards on the rights, support, and protection of victims of crime, and especially reflecting basic hate crime victims' needs. The directive puts stress on the vulnerable victims, including hate crime victims, and other victims such as victims of domestic violence, people with disability, and others. The Victim Rights Directive imposed an obligation of the member states to implement its content in national legislation. In the Czech Republic, it resulted in an introduction of Act on Victim of Crimes that actually in Czech Republic went beyond the directive in some of the aspects. We will talk about them later. Before we go through all the individual victim rights, I'd like to have a look at this slide. The list before you is describing some of the very basic needs of my clients: hate crime victims, domestic violence victims as well, but especially hate crime victims. If you look at the slide, you may see words like recognition. We have talked about recognition a lot today. In this instance, I mean, it is crucial for the victim to feel we trust them. We, actually me and the NGOs and other service providers, we trust them, we believe their side of the story, and especially, and I can't stress this enough, that we believe that there was a hate crime or bias motive involved in the crime. As to access, it's an access to information, to social providers, access to legal help and legal representation, which is so important for hate crime victims. Support, be it an emotional support, a therapeutical support, trust, as I have already mentioned, that there must be a mutual trust between the victim and the legal representative. Many times my clients tell me, no one trusts me, that there was a bias motivation, that there was a hate motivation in the crime. No one trusts me. Not the police, not the prosecutor, not my friends, not even my family, but I need someone to trust me. And that's one of the most important things in a relationship between me and my clients. The specific needs of hate crime victims vary in individual cases, but from my long-lasting practice, my experience is that the crucial needs are definitely, for the victims, definitely to be heard, to be acknowledged and trusted. I will briefly, very briefly, tell you something about Czech national legislation. Before the introduction of the Victims Directive and its implementation in the Czech Republic, the only legal recognition of the victims in their rights was the Criminal Procedure Code. And as you can see, the majority of the ensured rights are of a procedural character, which does give victim or injured party a strong standing, a firm position in the criminal procedure. If you look at them, they have a right to be represented by an agent, in my case, or in any other cases, by barrister or attorney, who may be present during all stages of proceeding, especially when interviewing the accused and the witnesses, and being able to either raise objections or ask questions. Victim or injured party has a right to inspect criminal files, attend the trial, and propose for additional evidence. They have also rights to claim financial compensation. Victim can appeal against the decision on compensation only, which is specific in Czech Republic. The victim cannot appeal against the decision in terms of guilt and punishment. I wanted to talk about compensation claims, but let's skip this slide and focus on victim rights as they were implemented from the directive in the Czech Republic. We have a definition of victim is, I will not go through that definition as it is long, but let's have a look at the rights. Rights to understand and to be understood and to be informed. In terms of understanding, the victim should be given the basic aspects of the proceeding. They should also receive information on where to seek help and what are their rights. This is extremely difficult at this time when you're a victim and you're interviewed by the police. You're given 5 pages of your rights. It's a transcript of rights, and actually no one takes the time to go through them, as it is 5 pages long. It is written in a very legal Czech language, obviously, and it is unsurprisingly quite difficult to understand, especially for victims. There's a right to receive information about the case, but only upon request, and only if the information cannot impede the ongoing criminal proceeding. A right for interpretation and translation. The victims shall be granted these rights if they specifically state they lack knowledge of the Czech language. However, they can actually choose what language they want to have other things translated to. Victim support services. Czech Republic has a relatively large network, NGOs. There's a generic state support probation and mediation service. I have this experience that police inform the victims about the specialized services providers, not on many occasions, let's say. Their knowledge usually ends with the probation and mediation service, so they do not refer the victim to the specific service providers. Right to be heard. Victims are entitled to be heard and sometimes legally required to give explanation or testimony. There should be a special approach, especially to children, but also other victims, such as hate crime victims. Their testimony should not be repeated. Procedural rights, in the event of a decision not to prosecute, meaning that victim or an injured party have a right to challenge the decision of the police or state prosecution and to receive information that the authorities decided not to start criminal proceeding, right to legal aid, either by accredited NGOs or registered barristers or lawyers. This success is very insufficient, unfortunately. Let's talk about secondary victimization. I have a definition here, so just quickly, it occurs when the victim suffers further harm, not as a direct result of the criminal act itself, but due to the manner in which institution and other individuals deal with them. I have listed some good and bad practice. Let's go through the bad practice first. For example, telling Muslim women to take off their scarf off their head to prevent further attacks, mentioning terrorism when questioning Muslim clients, mentioning and excessively talking about pride parades when questioning LGBT clients. We had a client who lost a baby during a hate crime attack, and she was actually questioned by the pregnant officer while sitting in a room where several other police officers were preparing their lunch, and the questioning police officer would engage in a small talk with them. As for a good practice example, it's calling a transgender victim by their preferred name and pronouns. As I don't have enough time to go through all the other rights, I'll just skip through them, but let's just a second stop at the secondary victimization. Those are rights designed to minimize the secondary victimization. Rights to protection, it's various type of interim measures in order to protect life, health, freedom, and dignity. Right to avoid contact with the perpetrator in all stages of proceeding. Right to protect privacy, which is actually one of the most important things, and that's the possibility to remove the personal information from the case file, even though name, date of birth, nationality, and ID number will always remain in the file. I have 1 last minute, so I will skip to examples of good practice in my legal practice. In Prague, we have a special counterterrorism and anti-extremism department, police department. There is very good cooperation with them in terms of good communication and willingness to prevent secondary victimization. In some cases, there is a financial support funded by the state for the NGO that provides social services and legal information. However, I have to also mention several examples of bad practice. As for the police, lack of education in terms of victim rights, in terms of hate crime, what hate crime is, and what hate crime victims need. There's also a problem with insensitiveness and sometimes even ignorance towards some minorities, especially Roma people and LGBT community. As for the prosecutors, unfortunately, a lot of them are not willing to investigate and prosecute the biased motive of the offenders. And for the courts and the judicial practice in Czech Republic, lack of knowledge about bias indicators that actually helps the authorities to prosecute hate crimes. Sorry for going so fast. I apologize to translators. but I didn't want to take too much time. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I just have one follow-up question. I understand that the answer to that may be a Czech Republic specific, but I just want to ask you, would you say that the victims are more and more aware of their rights, or does it not have that sort of dynamics?
It is getting much better because we are, not only us, but the police is being educated, especially the police is being educated about the victim rights in general, not only hate crime victims, but victims in general. And there are several programs that are actually focusing on educating the police more and more. And it starts there. It starts with educating the police so that they actually can tell the victims about their rights and refer them to specific NGOs and others.
Thank you so much, Petra. I invite everyone to join the discussion, and I remind our listeners that they can join in too by sending in, writing their questions to us, whether it be in Lithuanian, English, or whatever you prefer. But we have roughly 20 minutes and we can begin the discussion. Ir aš pirmiausia noriu jūs, Rasma, kreiptis, nes jūs...
First of all, I'd like to address you, Rasma, because we saw this video clip about you and we felt emotions very well, although this is a virtual conference, but we could feel that you were very emotional while watching video clips about other people. You even shed a tear. So your story is quite dramatic, and I was surprised to learn that you even didn't reveal your true origin to the father of your children, out of being afraid of being victimized because of your origin. So why is it so difficult to speak about those crimes from the perspective of a victim?
Dabar negirdėjom, bet atsirado kažkoks birzgesys, tai turbūt girdėsim.
Tai reiškia, su ausinėm negaliu
kalbėti. We didn't hear you before. Well, yes, now it's solved. Why is it so difficult? Well, I will talk from my own perspective. After that event, which I experienced at school, I was beaten to a coma. And it took me 4 months to recover. And even now, I cannot recover from that. And you're afraid because you're different. Another thing, I had to change everything about myself, my whole appearance. And maybe this also encouraged me to learn Lithuanian in a better way. So, did you come back to school? No, I couldn't come back to this school because I felt guilty because I was different. Even my teacher of mathematics managed to say that it was too little for that gypsy. You needed to be shot as during the Holocaust. And I started to be ashamed of what I was. Then I met a guy, we fell in love. I got married and I didn't tell him who I was. We went for a walk, and on the other side of the street we saw some Roma women walking, and he said, "Look, those gypsies, dirty gypsies." And I was thinking in my head, gosh, if you learn that I am a gypsy, you will leave me. But I was blind, I was young. I was angry at him for a couple of days. I didn't talk to him, but I was very vulnerable because of this, these differences in cultures. I will be very open with you. I was afraid to drop him because he was my first guy. And you know, in our traditions, when you start living with a guy, you have to continue staying with him. So I couldn't just leave him. And with time, we left for Ireland. We moved to Ireland, and I lived in the Lithuanian community there. But I tried to conceal everything about myself. And when I get to thinking about this now, I felt as if I was in a prison. I suffocated, and I felt that they were just speaking against everybody who were not in their ethnic community. They were against everybody who were different as them. And I myself have my best friends in the LGBT community, for instance. But as for them, they can conceal everything about that. But I cannot conceal my color of my skin, for example. Although now I don't look that dark as earlier on, I managed to conceal my ethnicity. But there was greater tolerance in Ireland, or not? Yes, they were more tolerant. But I also was a witness to a racist attack there as well. A taxi driver was called a black monkey by Lithuanian passengers. He sued against them in court. I was a witness. Then all those Lithuanians got against me. And I lied that I was a Roma. I said that I was Moldavian, Muslim, anything but not a Roma woman. And then they didn't like that I was Moldavian even. But these are petty things. Now coming back to the fact that I lied to my husband, finally I told him who I was. When my mother also got into a coma and it was urgent that I went back to Lithuania, I told him who I was. I said Roma, and he didn't even understand what does it mean, Roma. He said, oh yes, from Italy. He didn't even know the word Roma. So then I said directly I was a gypsy. So he was in a shock. He said that if he knew that you are a Roma, I had never married you. And we split it. And he started writing messages to me, writing that Roma people had to be shot, they had to be killed. He started setting up our children against me. And when my twins come to me, they say, Mother, don't tell anybody that you are a Roma. And my own children started discriminating against me. And they say, Mom, but Father called you a gypsy. And I say, I'm not a gypsy, I'm a human being. This is very sensitive. My brother hung himself up with that as a result of not being able to bear this hate speech against him. I don't have my brother now. My other brother left his home because he got missing. And what about your children? Do they speak with their father? Yes, I have this obligation. This is a law. I applied to children's rights institutions, and nobody can protect me as a mother. And nobody can protect me as a Roma. And this is very, very painful, because you can't live when your own children say, Mom, please don't tell anybody. Well, how can I not tell? It is obvious I'm dark. I say, my little ones, it's impossible for me to lie. My features are different. Of course, I changed the way I dress. But why? Only because you love me and recognize me. but maybe I want to have my own dress code. But I can't, because everybody would call me a gypsy. Another event happened. I wanted to open up my business, but I couldn't because I was told because I would be insolvent. That was this preliminary judgment. They said, go away, you gypsy. Another thing happened. They racketeered me. I had a lot of evidence to prove this. My neighbors were major witnesses in the case. But, you know, today I was listening to this discussion, and the majority of the policemen and prosecutors spoke, and I don't lie. I have the recordings of my court proceedings, and the prosecutor humiliated me in the eyes of everybody. He said that the Roma people tend to lie, and he said that I lied, and my origins were always reminded of. So what trust are we talking about? Rasma, let us hope that these are individual single cases among those police officers. Well, today I am strong. It doesn't matter that I cry. I go and help other Roma people voluntarily and freely, but I can tell you how Roma children are being persecuted at schools. I'm really thankful to the Center of the Lithuanian Human Rights. I always write to them. I discuss often, and I can have Monica, Birute, Jurate there. I always ask if something is not clear for me, and I try to encourage other Roma to engage in something. But you know, I always am against this wall. So let us speak about the Roma, but there's also this cross-examination when Roma have disabled children, and when a teacher is able to call a child, and it's very painful for me, who says that your small gypsy is a monkey, he suffers from Down syndrome. So, you know, I speak as a voice of my own nation, because Roma are silent. Rasma, it is very important that you speak. However, it is very sad that we have so little time, and I feel really bad that I have to cut you. Everything is all right, yes. And if we still have time, we will come back to you. I'm really so sorry that we have to interrupt you, and thank you for being so sincere, that you are so open and show your emotions. And we could speak with you for a couple of hours, but now I'd like to address Diana, that is Fabian. He is from Ecuador, living in Lithuania, and there was a specific case related to radical march in Lithuania, which is called Lithuania for Lithuanians. And you, Fabian, were attacked when you went to take part in that march, and you said Lithuania for everybody. So please tell us, why is it so difficult to speak about that? Or maybe it's on the contrary, it's not that difficult for you to speak about that.
Okay, I'm gonna speak in English, okay? I still need to improve my Lithuanian, but I'm getting there. So basically, for me, to be honest with you, it was not that hard after the incident, because it's not that I've been like attacked for a long time. It was just one time, and you know, everything went really viral in Lithuania, and I got a lot of help from a lot of people. So I felt supported, and in general, this didn't change my life at all. To be honest with you, in a way that I was still following my same
schedule every day. I just maybe try to change the time for a couple of weeks of when I was going to the gym, because I know that those guys were living in that area. But apart from that, I really felt that there was a lot of people supporting there in social media. But of course, there is always people that was writing me saying that it's a lie, that why I'm saying this, that I'm just trying to get attention. But I was always getting these negative messages from the beginning when I started my YouTube blog, because I had some videos that got viral as well here before. I'm sharing my life through YouTube. So there is always people commenting negatively, racist messages. But these things are not possible to avoid, maybe because even in videos where I was sharing how happy I'm in Lithuania, and there were negative comments, but of course also positive ones. So from all of this process, what I took is I made good friends actually after all of this process, because I had support from the human rights organization. I got a lawyer as well, Evelina, which is actually right now the Ministry of Justice. So that's really good. She was supporting me all the time from the beginning. Also, other people,
the justice.
Sorry?
The candidate to be the Minister of Justice.
Yeah, actually, I read today in the news. I just read it today that it was already. So anyway, everything was really nice when in this process, when they were helping me, because when I was going to the police, to be honest, I didn't feel the support from the police. Like when I was going to the police, I was feeling that they were trying to find a mistake in my declaration. So then I didn't feel support. I felt that they were against me, and this was really stressing. So probably that was the hardest part, not feeling safe where I should feel safe, not feeling supported where I should feel supported, which is the police. And so that was very, very disappointing, in a way that, even when we went to court later, one of those police officers that was in the court, he made a declaration kind of like that I was lying. Like, even though the police department made a public statement that they are apologizing, this other guy was still not accepting the mistake. So anyway, I know that what happened to me changed a lot how the police follows these processes, because I heard about other hate crimes, and actually the police is putting as an example my case, that really, if people complain, things can happen, things can change, these people can get what they deserve. So yeah, basically that was.
So if you had to single out one thing that you lacked as a victim, what would that be?
One thing I lacked as a victim? Yes, probably, yeah, only the support from the police. To be honest with you, that was the main thing that was lacking in all this process. Mm-hmm.
Yes, sorry. I think we are about to wrap this up, and to sum it up, and I just need to ask the final question to the audience before we do the summary. Prizams laimėt, jeigu pasakysit, kaip vadinasi nukentėjusiojo.
For the prizes, please say how what's the name, the word we use for the feelings of victims of crimes. We heard this answer truly during the session, so please put forward the response in writing, and the third three ones will receive prizes.
Why do you think it's so difficult for victims, from your perspective, to talk about these things, and what could we as society do to actually make it easier for them?
It is difficult for the victims. It's what Professor Iganski said. Hate crimes actually targets who we are. And if we have to apologize for who we are, and keep repeatedly saying, I was attacked because of me being different because of the offender has a bias against me. It's something, it's so tiring to repeatedly talking about this. And as for the society, I think the most important thing is not to tolerate it, to say something against it, to say something if we, as witnesses, if we witness hate crime, to say this is not normal, this is not how it should be, I'm sorry it happened. So for me, the most important thing for the society is not to remain quiet, to talk about it and not to normalize it.
Paul, would you add anything to this?
Yeah, I will just echo that sentiment. I was saying that hate crimes are often understood as message crimes, sending a message to injured parties and communities. We need messages going back to communities that hate crimes are taken seriously. The criminal justice system can send this message. The police can send this message by their practice, basically. And, you know, others, politicians, celebrities, etc. And so we have a battle of messages there. Hate crimes are message crimes. And as well as all the practicalities, they need to be fought with the message publicly and repeatedly. That these crimes are abhorrent, basically. And that the state will take them seriously.
Aš visiems pakartosiu klausimą, nes matau, kad vienas atsakymas atėjo, bet...
I'll repeat the question to everyone. I know that we have 3 prizes, so the question is the following. What's the name we see when we say, how do we title the negative emotions of hate crime victims because of undue process in the courts, engagement of the media, medical inspection of undue quality, and so on. Please write your response, and we're looking forward to hearing from you. There are many things we want to debate, but unfortunately, our time is up. I'm sorry I had to disappear for a second because my 2-month-old baby needed my attention. We have to not tolerate matters that are traumatizing and that hurt not only the direct victims but also their communities. Let's not give silence, let's be more tolerant to each other, and let's make sure that states and countries ensure this is tackled with. Thank you everyone for taking part in the debate. It's a pity we have to leave. I invite you to follow up on the other debates, and this can be done on our platform nztf.lt. Thank you very much once again, and